Good morning, boys and girls. Today we are going to go back in our reading textbooks and we're going to start a new story called Amazing Bird Nest. And this week we're going to revisit a skill that we have already talked about called main idea and details. So before we begin our lesson today, I would like you to get a few items. You will need your reading textbooks, page 338. You will also need a scrap piece of paper, and you will also need a pencil. So go ahead and pause the video and go get those items. Okay, so today you're going to be learning about main idea and details. This is our target skill for this week. So you know that when we have a target skill, that skill will be on our reading test. So we need to really make sure we understand our target skill so we can apply it for our reading text. Now, we're going to be talking about main idea and details. This is something that we've already talked about when we read the story Penguin Chick. Remember that main idea is what the text is mainly about, okay? I always like to say it's what it's mostly about, okay? Most begins with M and main begins with M. So it's what the story is mostly about. It can be stated in the text or it can be implied. A lot of times you will find the main idea either in the title or the first few sentences in your story. So it's what the whole story is mostly about. That's what your main idea is, okay? Now, we also have what we call details. When we think about details, we just know that the details are, or the facts, are small pieces of information. They tell us more about the main idea. So if I have a main idea, my details have to go back and relate or what we call support our main idea. Now, we can look at main idea and details in different ways. For instance, if I have a fiction story, okay, in this case, Grandma's Garden, it's a small short story. There's no chapters, okay? It's a fiction story, so it's not true. I would read the entire story and I would ask myself, now what was that story mostly about? And I would be able to tell what the story was mostly about. Obviously, it's gonna have to do with Grandma's Garden. Our title gives that away, okay? Grandma's Garden. My details are going to support what happens in Grandma's Garden, okay? Our details support the main idea. So I might have one main idea with 3 or more supporting details in a fiction story, in a story that's not true. Now, if I would look at a nonfiction text, it will be a little bit different, okay? Now, I know that my whole topic, my main idea, is going to be about what? Well, what's my title in this nonfiction story? Absolutely, snakes. This whole book is going to be about snakes. I could say that's my topic, okay? Now, the difference between a fiction and nonfiction book is that if I would go into this book, you can see a table of contents. These are the different chapters and their headings, okay? They're titles of each of the chapter. Each heading or each chapter can have its own main idea and details because we're talking about something different. Although it's all about snakes, we're talking about the different parts of the snake or the different things that a snake does. For instance, on page 16, I have On the Move. Okay? Page 18, I have Super Snakes. Page 20, I have Snake Senses. All of those different chapters is going to tell me something different about the snake. So if I would go, for instance, snakes all around, my main idea in this section or this chapter would talk about where snakes live. Okay, snakes are all around us. But then my details would have to talk about the different places that the snakes live. So this nonfiction book, I could have 8, 10 different main ideas, depending on how many headings or chapters there are, along with those details. I wouldn't just have one main idea with 3 details. Because it's a nonfiction story, and because I have different chapters that is giving me different types of true information. Okay, so if I have a nonfiction text, I will have more than one main idea, and in a fiction text, I might just have one main idea with 3 supporting details. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I would like you to turn to page 339. Turn to page 339. Your page should look like my page. Okay, we're going to read this story, Do All Birds Fly? And after we read this story, we're going to be filling out a graphic organizer on our main idea with 3 supporting details. Okay, so I'm going to read you Do All Birds Fly, and as I read you this selection, I want you to think about what this short story is all about, okay? And if we come up with something, I want you to think about, well, what details support that main idea, okay? All right, Do All Birds Fly? This heading is called Birds Are Alike. So I know this heading right here in this paragraph is going to tell me how birds are alike, because that's what that heading is. It says there are many different kinds of birds in the world, but all birds are alike in some ways. All birds lay eggs, all birds have feathers, and all birds have wings. So boys and girls, if I would look at that specific paragraph, it is a nonfiction selection that I'm reading you. I could pick out a main idea with details just from this paragraph. My main idea could be that all birds are alike in some ways, and then my details would be listing the ways that they are alike. How birds lay eggs, how birds have feathers, and how birds have wings. So I could have a main idea with details in just, I'm sorry, my lights went off, in just this paragraph. Okay, let's go ahead and continue to read. Penguins and ostriches. Just because all birds have wings does not mean that all birds can fly. Penguins are birds, but they do not fly. They use their wings to swim. Penguins are not the only birds that do not fly. Some large birds, like the ostrich, do not fly. They move about only by walking. So again, boys and girls, if I wanted to, I could take this paragraph because it only talks about penguins and ostriches, and I could find my main idea about how these 2 birds do not fly, and my details would support, well, if they don't fly, what do they do? The frigate. Some birds fly, but hardly ever walk. The frigate is a bird that does not walk very well. It also does not swim. It gets from place to place only by flying. Ducks. Most birds, however, combine flying with some kind of walking or swimming. Ducks can do 3 things. They can fly, walk, and swim. Perhaps that is why we sometimes say, "What a lucky duck." Okay, boys and girls, so I read you the story, Do All Birds Fly? So now we're going to fill out a graphic organizer on main idea and details. However, we're going to talk about it and do it a little bit differently than what I talked about. Now, I told you in nonfiction text, and I explained it to you as I was reading, that we can take different sections of nonfiction and we can have main idea and details for each section. We did that. We found a main idea and details for Birds Are Alike. we found a main idea and details for penguins and ostriches, and we could do the same for the frigate and the ducks. However, the main question that we're going to do today is, do all birds fly? I want to answer that question. So in order to answer that question, we are going to do a main idea and detail for the entire selection, okay? For the entire selection. Now, if I asked you what is the main idea and details for the heading of Birds Are Alike, you would just look at this section. But for today, I want to answer the question, do all birds fly? And in order to answer that, I need to look at the entire selection. So, what I would like you to do is, if you are at home, you will not have my graphic organizer, okay? So you will need to make your own graphic organizer. So go ahead and pause the video. You can look off of my graphic organizer and you can make something very similar on your scrap piece of paper. So go ahead and pause the video and do that now for a minute. Okay, boys and girls, so if you are at school, you have this piece of paper, our graphic organizer about main idea and details, do all birds fly? The first thing that we need to find out is the main idea, okay? So we're asking the question, do all birds fly? Well, if I go back to my story, I know from what I've read that there are many different kinds of birds in the world. We found out when we read the entire selection that there are similarities and differences between birds. Now, if you remember when we compare and contrast, we know the words similarities mean how things are the same or alike. And we know the word differences means how they are different. Okay, so we could say for our main idea, if we're answering the question, do all birds fly? We could say, well, there are many different kinds of birds in the world. There are similarities and they have differences. So we're going to write that for the main idea, okay? So we know there are many different kinds of birds in the world. They have similarities and differences. That is going to be my main idea of this selection. When I'm taking the entire selection, I'm coming up with the main idea that, yes, we know that there are many different kinds of birds in the world. It told us that. And from reading the selection, we found out that they do have similarities. The birds do have similarities, but yet they also are different. They also have their differences. So I'll give you a minute to go ahead and write that. Okay, now we need to find details. Remember our details, okay? Our details, all our details do is help us support the main idea. They tell us more about the main idea. We already know that there's different kinds of birds in the world. We have to tell how they have similarities and how they have differences. Well, if you remember, how are all birds the same? Do you remember? If you don't remember, go back to your story and find out how all birds have similarities. Okay, remember the word similarities also means alike or same. So look for those clue words. If you go back to the first paragraph, it says, but all birds are alike in some ways. Well, what do? All birds lay eggs, all birds have feathers, and all birds have wings. Would that be a good detail to add? Of course, because that detail helps support the main idea that we wrote, that they have similarities. We're proving it. We're proving that they have similarities because it told us in our book that all birds lay eggs, have feathers, and have wings. So we're going to go ahead and write that in our first detail. All birds lay eggs, have feathers, and have wings. Go ahead and write that in your first detail box. Go ahead and take a minute to write that in your first detail box. Okay, boys and girls. Now, we figured out how they have similarities. And if I recall from what I've read, they talked about how the birds are similar in the first heading. Well, it even says birds are alike, okay? When I read the next 3 paragraphs, it talked about how these different birds were different. So if I would break it down and I would look at penguins and ostriches and the frigate, how are they different? How are they different? Do you remember about the penguins and ostriches? If you recall, the penguins and ostriches don't fly. They don't fly. Both of them walk. We know from Penguin Chick that they wobble, right? They walk. But penguins are also known for what? Yeah, how do they get around? They swim, okay? They swim a lot in the ocean. They're near the ocean because that's where they get their source of food. Okay, and it says that ostriches do not fly. They move about only by walking. And if we look at the frigate is so different from the penguins and ostriches because the frigate hardly ever walk and they do not swim. They get from place to place only by flying. So how could I take that information from both of these paragraphs and write a detail? How could I take all of that information and write a detail that supports the main idea that they're different? Well, boys and girls, we could say penguins don't fly, but swim, right? Ostriches what do? They don't fly. They walk. Okay, but what bird flies? The frigate, exactly. The frigate gets to places by flying. So boys and girls, we just explained how 3 different birds are different from each other. Penguins don't fly, but they swim. Ostriches don't fly, they walk. The frigate gets to places by flying. The frigate doesn't swim and has a very hard time of walking. So we just explained, boys and girls, the differences of 3 different birds that we've read about. I'll give you a minute to go ahead and write that. Okay, so we have our last detail. And we learned from our selection that we read that there are some birds that can do all of it. Some birds can walk, fly, and swim. So that's the detail that we want to write, okay? Here we read about ducks. It says most birds, however, combine flying with some kind of walking or swimming. The ducks, they can do all three things. So that's what we're going to write. Most birds combine flying with some kind of walking or swimming like ducks. Most birds combine flying with some kind of walking or swimming like ducks. Okay, boys and girls, so there you have it. We came up with our main idea based on the entire selection, Do All Birds Fly? We found our main idea to be there are many different kinds of birds in the world. They have similarities and they have differences. We were able to prove our main idea was correct by providing details that support the main idea. All birds lay eggs, have feathers, and have wings. I just told how they are similar. Now we share how they're different. Penguins don't fly but swim. Ostriches don't fly, they walk. And the frigate gets to places by flying. All three of those birds do something different. Yet, here, it says most birds combine flying with some kind of walking or swimming like ducks. So boys and girls, we came up with our main idea with our three details on do all birds fly? So answer that question. Do all birds fly? From what we read, did you figure that out? No, they don't. We were able to prove that not all birds fly. So boys and girls, that's main idea and details. You did a fantastic job today. Thank you for paying attention and working along.